Hello YouTube, welcome back to the channel. On my previous video, I reviewed the Author Master 2 Pro laser machine and explained how I apply laser technology into my knife making methods, and quickly touched upon a few points about how I made this knife. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to check out that video, but in this video I'll be focusing on how this knife was constructed. The process is really much the same as how I construct all my knives. However, since the scales were custom engraved with the laser machine, I did not want to spoil the pattern with a handle pin showing, so I decided it would be best to use a hidden pin construction mechanism to keep the scales together. I'll start by lasering my template onto the piece of 5160 steel I'm using, then proceed to cut out the profile. I use a 36 grit belt to clean up the profile as it takes off a lot of metal quickly. For the bevels, a 60 grit to do the initial grinding gives me better results than the 36 grit. Punch and drill the pinholes. I will be using a 6mm carbon fiber tube for the pinning, so my pinholes will be drilled to 6mm. In addition to the 3 pinholes, there will be a 6mm lanyard hole and 2 10mm holes drilled into the tang. These will help the epoxy seep through to both sides of the scale once it's glued up. Draw file the blade to create a clean and flat surface. Mark and scribe your bevel areas. Using a file guide and a round file, I file in my plunge lines. Once the plunge lines are finished, I grind my bevels in on my belt grinder and finish the bevel on my file jig with a flat file. This helps me to achieve even flat bevels on both sides of the knife, as well as to blend the plunge lines into the bevels without damaging the plunge lines itself. Before the blade is quenched, I normalize the steel first. 5160 is a very easy and forgiving steel to heat treat. To normalize, heat it up to critical temperature and leave it to air cool until the steel doesn't glow anymore. Critical temperature is reached when the steel doesn't stick to a magnet anymore. Heat up the blade again to critical temperature, ensuring that there is a nice even heat distribution throughout the blade. Then quench in oil. I'm using a fast quenching oil specifically formulated for steel hardening. To check that the steel hardened properly, run a file down the edge of the blade. If it skates off with that high-pitched glassy sound, your blade hardened. Proceed to the tempering process. After the tempering process, the blade should have a golden straw color tone to it. If you see any blue coloring, you might have over-tempered the blade. I prefer to round off the choil and knock off any 90-degree edges with a 400 grit belt. Then grind in the swedge on the blade. Next up is to clean up the blade and hand sand it to the preferred finish. I'm taking it up to 600 grit. I'm using a piece of natural micarta with a custom pattern lasered onto it. After splitting it into two pieces, I roughen up the backside with sandpaper to give the epoxy a rough surface to adhere to. For the pinning material, I have decided on 6mm carbon fiber tube. Use a drop of super glue to secure the knife in place on top of the scale so that you can accurately mark and drill the pinholes. The idea behind hidden pins is obviously that you do not see the pins. Therefore, your pinholes in the scales should not be drilled all the way through, with the exception of the lanyard hole. Depending on your scale thickness, this might not be very deep, but try to go as deep as you can without drilling right through. My scales are 5 millimeters thick, so I'll be aiming to drill about 3 millimeters into the scale. Shape the scales as needed. Before I get to the glue up stage, I'll laser my maker's mark onto the blade. Mix the epoxy according to the manufacturer's instructions, glue up the scales, clamp it up, and leave to cure overnight. I use a cotton bud soaked in acetone to clean those hard-to-reach areas where the epoxy seeped out. When the epoxy is cured, profile the scales to the desired shape. Round off those hard corners and finish the blade to the desired grit. Sharpen and the project is finished. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I trust that you learned something new today to apply to your knife making methods. Like, share and subscribe, and until the next build, keep well and goodbye.